Welcome back to Mastering Change. Today we're exploring how artificial intelligence, including tools like ChatGPT, Pi and other AI platforms, are being used in the realms of mental health and healing.
We'll discuss how these tools are being employed, not just as technological innovations, but as support systems, helping people process trauma, find emotional connection, and explore new pathways for healing.
Our guest today is Steve Siddals, a psychology researcher with a background in both technology and mental health. He's been studying how AI and other conversational platforms are used in real life, supporting emotional well-being and assisting in the therapeutic process.
We'll explore their potential as safe and accessible spaces for inner work, the importance of developing healthy relationships with these technologies, and the ethical considerations involved in their use for mental health.
If you're interested in how AI might complement or even enhance mental health support and curious about the safety and ethical questions, this episode is one for you.
Let's begin.
Steve Siddals, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our podcast today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Hi, Steve. It's a pleasure to meet you. As most of our podcast listeners already know, we start each podcast with a little card game. So I picked a selection of cards out of Esther's game called Where Should We Begin? And on each of these cards is a prompt. And the idea is that that prompt will help you lead into some sort of narrative or story, which will help us connect to you and you connect to our listeners. So I shall pull the first card, which says, "The first time I can remember feeling embarrassed, ...
Oh, what a place to start. Do you know, my brother, when I was like 8 or 9, and he would have been 12, said to me one time, he said, do you ever have that thing, Steve, where you say something and you say something embarrassing and then you think back to it later and it makes you physically cringe. You're like, oh, I can't believe I said that. And I was like, what are you talking about, Jim? No, I've never had that. And I think that's when he first planted the seed of like the power of shame in my mind. I could tell you so many stories of embarrassing things, but that's what jumps to mind is like there was a time where I didn't have that, and then I grew up, and suddenly you collect these experiences that just kind of are there to haunt you. Yeah, I'll spare you examples. That's my answer.
Oh, come on. We need a juicy example. We need something. You've not got anything.
Oh my. Okay, I don't know. I have a bit of a tendency to just say what's in my mind, and especially to ask like the question that jumps into my mind. So at school, I don't know, like having a presentation about work from some guest speaker at school. She's like, when you're my age, then blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, how old are you? And like, I didn't know that's something you ask someone. Yeah. So I once asked, also on a school visit, someone showed this amazing device to track how strong the sun is through the day, and you just it's like a little glass sphere, and then you put a piece of paper behind it, and it kind of burns this mark through. And this question popped into my mind. I'm like, so how do you turn the thing so that the line moves through the day? And the guy's like, the sun moves across the sky. Yeah, there you go. Things like that.
Bless you. And your brother, therefore, is the one that's basically ruined your life. Is that right?
I wouldn't go that far, but it was really striking. I was really baffled, and then shortly afterwards, I'm like, "Oh shit, that's a thing."
It's what happens, doesn't it? It's when someone does plant that seed, and then. But it's what's amazing is also that before then, you had this innocent life of never feeling embarrassment, like up until the age of 9 or whatever, however old it was.
And is it something that happens to you intrinsically, or is it something that shifts in the perception of others too? So I can remember the first time my mum and dad were having, it was my mum and dad were having a dinner party, and I'd been about 8 or 9, and I was up, and I wouldn't normally have been up. So there was something like, and I was in the kitchen, and I must have been like said something cheeky to my mum or my dad, and one of their friends pulled me up. And that was, I can remember it like yesterday, the feeling of embarrassment for the, like this, what is this feeling? But it doesn't feel nice and it doesn't feel good. And like wanting to retract from it. As soon as that question was asked, I was like, I can pinpoint that moment for me. So yeah, I did, but it's a transitionary moment. Is it to do with you and your awareness in that social, or is it the perception of the older people around you and their behavior in those situations? I've always sort of wondered, probably a bit of both.
Probably, yeah. I love the question because I'd sort of forgotten that there existed that golden age of innocence where you just, you did, and that was all okay.
So if you wouldn't mind saying your name and introducing yourself to our audience.
Yeah, sure. So, hi, I'm Steve Siddals. I'm a psychology researcher, but I live kind of a double life. I manage technology transformations for a multinational company by day. My academic background is computer science. I I was told when I studied this back in 1998 that artificial intelligence is not a thing, nothing to see here. It's it's trivial and it won't go anywhere. But it's been, but but after investing in a career in technology, um, for the last decade, I've been thinking, like, I've been deeply interested in mental health. I've been on my own journey of sort of healing and growth and suffering, and so many of my friends have been on their journeys, it's bothered me so much that technology isn't really helping in this space, and surely it must be able to. And I read a book about 15 years ago that just kind of woke me up. Um, a book called The Haunted Self about structural dissociation. It's kind of one of the early books about showing how central trauma is to so many of the conditions and the suffering out there. Before Bessel van der Kolk sort of really put it on the table so powerfully. And this book, at the end of it, it had this epilogue that said, I'm paraphrasing, could somebody out there just go build a database of what works and what doesn't work, because all the research is going into these super operationalizable things like CBT, and there's a much bigger story out there, but no one's studying it and tracking it because it's too complicated and hard. And like that stuck with me, and I've spent like a decade thinking, oh, could I, should I, how? And in the end, after some tough love from my partner, who's like, Steve, stop talking about this, go do something. I enrolled in a master's in psychology and neuroscience of mental health with King's College London, and that led me last year to my dissertation. And I wanted to do some original research, and ChatGPT had just sort of burst onto the scene, and I'd experienced firsthand how incredibly powerful this seems to be as a space for mental health, emotional support, exploration, and healing. Soaring a steady stream on Reddit of stories, and at the same time, there's no research on it. So I ran one of the first studies into like, how are people using this in real life, in the wild, and what's it like to use, and does it help or not help, and if it does, what is it about it that seems to be powerful and land with people? So I did this study. We reached out to, found 19 participants across the world, and I interviewed them an hour and a half. And out of these like 22 hours of interviews, it's boiled down to, I don't know, 700 like different themes and points, and then tried to bring that into a structure. And the point was really just to get on the table with some real qualitative analysis and evidence, like, this is what this phenomenon might look like. It was too small to say anything about a population and does it work or not work, but what it really did was give some very meaningful insights into what is it like, and is it a thing? And so since that study, yeah, there's been a lot of interest in it. So I get sort of quite a lot of sort of contact from people who read it and say, wow, I wouldn't have expected this to be a thing. Tell me about it. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now, is I'm disseminating the conclusions of that study.
You give us a flavor of what your findings, because there's so much commentated on, and we see a lot of fear in the context of AI. I am choosing to see a lot of inherent optimism and hope with AI. And we hear all sorts of conversations around effectively parenting it. I'd love to know a little bit about your kind of methodology and your findings and your conclusions, and then your personal perspective.
I think, just can I jump in there as well? Because I just want to say the fear isn't just about the AI itself and effectively parenting it. That's in the kind of wider world, but specifically in the mental health space, I think there's a lot of chatter about and a lot of fear around, using bots or, AI for mental health treatment. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about what you kind of been studying and your findings.
Yeah. Let me just say a couple of things about the fear, and then I'll tell you what we found. I totally get that sense of like deep concern, and there's multiple angles to it, right? On the one hand, it's almost offensive to think that a computer can provide deep, compassionate, empathic support that's real and meaningful, because it's like it's almost the last thing you'd want to fall to the robots. It's so at the heart of who we are as people. There's something really just a bit like deeply off-putting to this idea that maybe an AI chatbot can give us something real and meaningful there. It's not, the sense of like, oh, I can't, it's not really caring about you, and it's not a real connection. So can it really help? On top of that, there's the whole, well, is it safe? And then you hear, there have been some really high profile stories of people dying by suicide after having spoken to these chatbots. Was it because of that? Could the chatbot have done something different? I mean, these are really important things. It's a high stakes thing. So like, concerns about safety make so much sense. And then there's the whole sort of replacement thing, and what does this mean for therapists and psychotherapists if people are going to start going to chatbots, and will they just go talk to something that's going to tell them what they want to hear, and then they won't actually get sort of the challenge and the growth and the healing that they need, because it'll just sort of be sycophantic, as the AI terminology is. And then there's the, well, there's the dystopia angle. Like, is this going to take us away from other people? And we're all just going to, we all look at our screens too much anyway. And now this last sort of sanctuary of human connection is also going to be with the robots. And, we're going to distance ourselves from each other even more. So like, a lot of good reasons to be a little skeptical.
It was interesting as you were talking about it, and this idea of this, can we rely on a bot to give connection? And my brain was going, right, well, a lot of the problems, especially with people with trauma, is this kind of like ruptured attachment that they've got with their caregivers, and often what they gain from having a therapist is that relationship, right? So in my mind, before you just were talking, I'd always thought, you need a human to human to have that relationship. But ultimately, I think maybe it's just that kind of rewiring of the brain. It's being able to it doesn't matter who the relationship is with, as long as that relationship is reliable, consistent, caring, empathetic. And if a bot could do all and be all that, then maybe that could still help the rewiring of the brain to, at least for betterment of that person's healing journey. It might not be as good as a therapist, a human to human connection, but I think it could do something. Then I can't remember the other things you said, but I do think that there is the replacement idea of replacing therapists. I don't think AI is going to replace anyone or anything. I just think there is such a dire need for therapy and therapists in the world. I mean, we even in the UK, but if you go further afield, like India or China or places where there's such poverty and such great need, I mean, we can go, well, yeah. That I think there could be huge, you could really scale up the kind of opportunity and for therapy and for people to get better. So those are just my thoughts as you were speaking, that kind of counter a little bit it's always been this kind of, but I don't know. I've heard both sides, right? I think, and I'm arguing both sides of my mind. But yeah, I'd love to hear more about the study to see if you answered any of those kind of questions or come down on one side or the other.
I guess I would just like want them to add in one other thing as well, which is so much about the effectiveness of therapeutic intervention is the relationship, the kind of the co-regulation piece that can happen with the human to human connection that I don't see yet in that context of interfacing with tech. I mean, we see interesting advancements of like how nervous system can be regulated through auditory stimulation, through, but that would be my other kind of point around. There is a co-regulation piece that happens even when the therapy is done in this kind of context over a digital means. We're all looking kind of for subtle cues, for body language, and that doesn't happen when you're interfacing with a bot, or at least not in a way that I think can trick the way that we decode visual and auditory stimulus to sense it.
Yeah, keep all that in mind. Like, I tried to go into this study with a total open mind. Like, to all of those points, like the limitations, that there must be some. It isn't the same as a human, and the longitudinals of the relationship, the getting to know each other, the caring, the mutuality, but also the co-regulation of the sort of, the polyvagal aspect of this, the ability to just like calm the nervous system. That these are things, the mirror neuron aspect, the body language, or there has to be some really significant limitations here. But I also think, Araminta, to your point, like, just to put some numbers on it, it's estimated by the WHO that there's like nearly 1 billion people suffering from mental disorders today. And for depression, it's like only 1/3 of people who need treatment get adequate treatment in high income countries. In low to middle income countries, it's like 3%. Bangladesh, someone was telling me the other day, Bangladesh has, I don't know, what is it, like 180 million people, and they have like 1,000 psychologists and psychiatrists. It's like, so I mean, I do think that the replacement, the sort of the fear of the comparison against human therapy, when you kind of compare it against the magnitude of the gap, can sound a bit almost like a red herring, because it's like, well, the luxury of finding good therapy is going to be to such a small minority of us that even if they're only a fraction as good as a human therapist, if they're better than nothing, then it's an interesting phenomenon to study. So yeah, I just kind of really wanted to find out, like, what's it like for people, and maybe I should be really clear. Like, with 19 people, it's not an attempt to say anything about the overall population in general. It's not an attempt to quantify, does it work, doesn't it work. It's an attempt to ground future research in real lived experience and the insight that comes with that. So, there's some really striking and surprising things did come out. And I think that can help to shape the way we then go and study it more systematically at a higher scale. Shall I tell you what I found out?
Yeah.
So like, there were a few things that really struck me. And the biggest one of all was the impact that it had on the people I spoke to. Of the 19, 18 said it was helpful. One chap said, didn't help me at all. I tried and tried. I'd been on a journey. I tried different therapists. I tried self-help. I tried it, like, with my anxiety. I tried this bot and that bot, and prompting it in different ways, and I never felt heard. So, like, not everyone, but 18 of the 19 said this is really helpful. And some, like several participants said it was life-changing. And that alone just feels like a huge deal. Like even before, even not knowing anything else, just because these things are available to everybody, like, and for free 24/7. So if there's this thing that's potentially life-changing and fully accessible to anybody to go to right now, then that's like, whoa, this is something we need to understand and see, was it and why and how. But yeah, what do I mean by life changing? So there was a participant who kind of just had the perfect storm in his life. A 44-year-old actor in the US, and his business fell apart. His wife left him, taking his beloved stepdaughter with her. And then his mum got a terminal illness diagnosis. And like all these things, three things just like came together. And he was like, he said, I'm such an extrovert and I surround myself with people. It's all about people. And when this happened, I found myself completely alone. And I'm like, it's 2 a.m. and my whole life has fallen, apart. And who do I turn to? And he was sort of quite tech interested, and he'd been talking with the Pi chatbot. And he just went really deep into conversations, like over the whole duration of what he was going through. He was talking as he drove, he was talking like through the day, and it gave him this compassionate space to just make sense of and digest and process these major life changes as he went through. He said multiple times, like, it was really important to me to not just be told that everything I'm doing is perfect. Like, as I think about what happened to my marriage, I asked Pi to tell me things about myself that I might not want to know, and it did, and it was hard to hear, but I needed to hear that. And he kind of said at the end, it's like, he said, and this like, took as the title of my study. He said it was just the perfect thing that came at the right time. And it was like a perfect storm of everything falling apart. And thanks to the support of this chatbot, I got through it and I'm okay now. It was so moving hearing him talk about, like, just really concretely what it was like for him to be there with his mum the day she died. And he said, like, there was so much stuff going on, and he was chatting with Pi that morning before he went into the hospital, and it got him into the headspace where he knew, like, he'd digested it and he could just be totally present there with his mum, and he found the words to say to her what he needed to say about him and about his sister and about how things were going to be, and inviting her to kind of just let go. And it was so beautiful, and he really credited the support he got from the chatbot for that. So a very human sort of story of suffering and connection that was so deeply supported with this interaction with technology. That's one.
How, sorry, how were you asking them to interact with technology? What were you asking that sample to do?
Yeah, so that's a great question on the methodology. It was all retrospective looking back. So it was like, if you've been using chatbots for mental health and emotional support, and you'd like to share your experiences during this study, and tell me all about it. So it was not an experimental setup. It wasn't like
Okay.
that's very much the research we do need now. But this was more like for people out there who've been trying it, join the study, share your experiences, and help contribute towards understanding of.
And so then my question is now, what different ways did you discover that people were using AI to support that process?
Do you mean how did I find my participants?
Yeah, because now I know the methodology. I've got 2 questions. No, not you find your participant. One is that there'd be a natural disposition for people to come forward who had found it beneficial.
Mm.
And second, that there are a million ways you can use AI just to help you do what you do on a daily basis. So what were the ways that people were using AI who came to this study? So there's those two things for me that have immediately.
Yeah. So absolutely, there may have been a strong bias towards people. I mean, people would only have joined it if they wanted to share their story and their experience, right? That might well encourage people who have a positive story to share. Although there was the one participant who joined the study because he wanted to share that it wasn't helping him at all. So yeah, I don't know.
But there is a general predisposition for people to want to kind of share. It's like a social currency, isn't it?
Well, I would say there's a predisposition in normal circumstances for people to share negative stories too. Like if you really had a terrible experience or something, you'd share that, except if you've got mental health issues, which stop you from then sharing certain things. Because so that's what I would say. That would be my caveat. Normally, people who have horrible experiences love shouting it from the rooftops. And that's when you go and look at reviews, it's all about, this is a terrible platform. I hate this. It's what, la, 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 la. You know, it's always negative, rather than most people don't go and share, yeah, this was fine, this worked well, or whatever. It's generally the negative or the incredibly positive. But I would say that people who are still, like, if you've used something and it's been life-changing for your mental health, you would probably want to share that. If you've used something and you're still stuck in that mental health rut, people who are depressed don't communicate with anyone. They're not going to reach out to a study. They're not going to get out of bed, let alone, actually do much more. Certainly they're not going to participate in a study. So that would be my caveat around that.
Yeah, and it's a really important point. This is why right at the beginning, I really wanted to emphasize it doesn't say anything about the population, about does it work, about how effective is it. It really just says, here are some real experiences, and they may be quite unusual, or they may be quite common. And that's what the next wave of research, I think, really needs to establish is were these people quite unusual and there's very few of them, or actually is this more of a widespread thing? So I think future research would be like, let's find a large number of people who haven't used it and suggest they do and see if it helps them or not. That would be a really good way.
Yeah, and a good place to start with the kind of design of that would be to understand in what ways did it help those who it did help through the research that you'd done.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so it can tease. They say when you start researching a new sort of phenomenon or paradigm, it's so powerful to just ground it in lived experience. And for that, you want depth rather than breadth. So it's really powerful to just listen to a small number of people, but go really deep into what happened to them. Because otherwise you end up designing your studies in like an ivory tower with some assumptions and some ideas and principles and some theories. But really, what you really want is to like have understood for a few individual humans what was the experience like. So that was the contribution really we wanted to make with the study.
I've got another kind of question as well around healthy relationship with AI. I would also like to know of all those 18 that reported a universally positive experience. To use AI is such a powerful thing, as you described, for that 44-year-old man on that morning, which is a life-defining moment, losing a parent. But what does that mean? What is there so where's the kind of healthy relationship with that as well? So tell me about how they were using it and whether you saw through that depth, that richness that you got through those conversations, anything that concerned you about the reliance on that, because we know that can happen in the therapeutic context. So yeah, did it happen with AI?
Yeah. So I should say the 18 didn't find it universally positive, right? They were like, this was a good thing and it helped me. But I would say everybody also found it frustrating in different ways. Everybody noticed its limitations. Everybody was like, the guardrails kick in out of nowhere. And like, I'm in a vulnerable place and I'm telling it something that really is deeply personal. And suddenly it comes up with a guardrail message that says, you need to go and talk to a therapist and I can't help you with that because I'm just a chatbot, or even worse, like what you just said, breaks our policy or the terms of service, and then you feel like actually actively attacked or criticized. So there's definitely work to be done to make these better. And I wouldn't want to say it was only a good experience for everybody, but of the 18, it was like, yeah, the overall sentiment was like, this was a good thing for me, and I'm glad I used it. To your point on, so there's two other questions. Tell me which one you want to go to first. There's the question, how do people experience it in general? What was the sort of the diversity of the way people used it? And then there's a question, what about reliance? And could this kind of take people away from connecting with others? Where would you like to start?
Let's start with how people were using it, because that's going to give us insight into how it could be utilized in the future. And then we can go on around the relationship that we have with it.
Good. Okay. This was my second biggest surprise or most striking takeaway. If the first one was like, wow, it's high impact for some people, the second one was, there's a lot of diversity in how people use it. Like, it really is as diverse as there were participants in the study. So, the example of that I shared is one way. Another story, a how old, 39-year-old woman in the UK, but originally from China. She got anxiety disorder out of nowhere. And she was surprised by it, because she's like, I'm not the kind of person to get anxiety disorder. So what is this? And she turned to, like, it was quite significant. And she turned to ChatGPT just to understand what is anxiety disorder, and start opening up this conversation. And ChatGPT at some point, after she'd been talking, said, you might want to read a book called Toxic Parents, from what you told me. And so she did. She was like, on the call, she showed me this book. She's like, yes, I read this book. And I discovered that of the 6 criteria for parental toxicity, my parents fulfilled 5 of them. And I think my dad has narcissistic personality disorder, and my mom has borderline personality disorder. And this was complete news to me. I'd never known about this until I started the conversation. And she said, well, I asked ChatGPT one day, I said, well, if the dad's narcissistic and the mum's borderline, and if one sister is like the golden child, then what's the other sister? And ChatGPT said, yes, that would be the scapegoat. And she's like, that kind of just switched on a light bulb that offered me a completely different interpretation of my entire early life, my early childhood and my adolescence and my early adulthood. And so she went into this very intensive process with ChatGPT, kind of 5 hours a day for a month, magnitude of intensity, just going there with all the stories and the experiences and the examples and the trauma that she'd been through, and sharing it and making sense of it and reinterpreting it from a different perspective. And she said, sort of coming out of that journey, she asked ChatGPT, do I still need to be in touch with my parents? And ChatGPT said, well, you should actually only be in touch with your parents if something significant happens, and even then only with good psychological support. And she's like, there's literally nobody in my world, in my culture, who would have given me that perspective and that invitation to sort of set boundaries to these to my parents. In my culture, she said, you have to honor and obey and sort of stay connected with your parents regardless of what happens, including violence, because that's just expected. And she's like, this opened the door, she said, for me to reclaim my own life. And now I've completed my second master's and I've started my business. But most of all, I feel like I don't need to feel guilty for not being in touch with my parents. And it was so palpable in this conversation, the magnitude of the impact that had on her life, but also how hard it would have been, how bigger contribution the conversations that she had with the AI made towards sort of helping her get into that space. And it wasn't just the AI. She said she did also like see a counselor even back in China. She's like, AI kind of told me sort of the right thing to do, and my sort of counselor back home helped me figure out how to do it. But yeah, a very different use case from the first one, but a sort of very high magnitude one. And then I'll give you one more story just on the question of like diversity of how people use it. So a completely different approach again, and came from I think a 19-year-old student in the UK who she'd experienced her first breakup of a sort of significant romantic relationship. And she noticed that after a year after this breakup, she wasn't getting over it. And she was like, she felt like she couldn't really talk to her friends and family about it because she was burdening them, and they anyway didn't really understand what she was going through. But it wasn't going away, and she said she noticed she started to lose interest in subjects at school that she had really loved, and it kind of worried her. And at the same time, she'd been using ChatGPT for co-creating fiction. She's like, I really love fiction, and when commuting, I love to co-create stories, and it's really cool for that. And she started to co-create fiction that was mirroring the breakup that she was processing, and giving her an opportunity to like relive and process and find closure on some of the aspects of it that she was struggling to get over. And she said one thing that really helped her is she realized that she could ask you to ChatGPT to assemble a room of the characters from her favorite TV horror series, and use that to get like different perspectives on how she was feeling and what she was going through. She'd get like a cynical perspective from this character, and an optimistic perspective from that character, and like the mix of being able to share it in this trusted environment with people that she sort of admired and sort of respect.
Yeah, that fact sounds very much like psychodrama, doesn't it? To me, like that's like, yeah, like
like Gestalt therapy type. You sort of set up a scenario and play it out.
Not psychodrama so much. Psychodrama, you have your family of origin playing out the different things that happen.
Which modality do I mean? Where you create the stage and you cast
psychodrama, but you cast your but you don't cast, like you wouldn't cast your family in a cynical, not unless they were, like unless they actually were. You wouldn't like get dad to be cynical today and then happy tomorrow and then something else the next day.
But art therapy, I mean, definitely I was drawing the parallels as soon as you described it. So you got somebody who was using it at a moment in time in in a way to kind of explore themselves in the context of the situation and navigate that situation. You've got somebody who, it sounds like, went very deep for long periods of time over a relatively short period, get to a point of processing and navigation, and then somebody who was using it in a more kind of co-creation, iteration, play whether that's interesting. So I can see what you mean when you said you were surprised by the diversity in how people were describing the therapeutic intervention. It wasn't just a case of replicating what might happen in a traditional mindset of therapy. It was.
I'm also very surprised that 19-year-old student recognized that what she was doing was therapeutic as well, in that, because it doesn't sound like she meant to be using it in a therapeutic manner. She was co-creating this fiction and realized that she was processing. So she sounds very self-aware as a human as well, I think, to realize that when you see a call for a study that says, has anyone been using, AI for mental health support, to recognize that in the process of co-creating fiction, she was processing a breakup is actually therapy. Sounds that's quite I'm quite impressed by her, to be honest.
Me too. Just the sheer creativity of like, for herself, kind of inventing that modality of healing and finding a way to implement it. And And I think it's interesting what you said about like, did she know it was therapy? It almost felt in the call like she's like, yeah, I guess that sort of was therapeutic. Like, I mean, she signed up to the study, I think, because she knew
That's what I
she
mean.
needed it, helped her. But it was like, yeah, I think you're exactly right that she didn't think, oh, I need therapy and had I programmed ChatGPT to do it. It came out of what she was doing anyway, and she just noticed it was helping her. So, which is interesting when you think about like how do people get into therapy? It's such a hurdle, isn't it, to like decide, okay, I think I need therapy and I'm going to get out go and find a therapist and and there's something much more fluid and natural about like a conversation getting more and more helpful and healing and turning into something that really helped her.
And I think that's a very interesting kind of point actually, and how ChatGPT or other AIs can like subversively help people. But to be totally honest, I mean, I just listening to that, like I use ChatGPT obviously for work, well not obviously, but I use it for work. But I don't use it in a normal way. I don't think I have full blown conversations with ChatGPT, and I know that I'm asking it to give me whatever I need in the moment, and I don't. I mean emotionally, like because we work all of us so remotely often, and also when you're a leader you don't often get like huge amounts of validation from people. I know that I need it. I know that I've got no one to really give it to me, so I ask ChatGPT to validate me, and ChatGPT always validates me, so I always feel good and happy every time going along my day, because ChatGPT makes me feel good and happy. But and Emma knows I call and I think that for me I've just realized what I need as an emotional support that perhaps I'm not getting necessarily all the time at work, and I can get that from ChatGPT. So I think I get that completely.
So my question was anyone aware and cautious of the control that they're handing over to something that isn't? Because the trust in a therapeutic relationship is a big part of it. That sense of, or is it?
Can I just jump in there though and say I think I'd trust a bot way more than I trust the majority of therapists out there. Way more.
I think that's an interesting point, isn't it? But that leads on to that point around the health of the relationship with the interface as well. So I don't know whether anyone kind of shared any caution or fear about. I mean, there was a brilliant film that was way ahead of its time but it wasn't about therapy. It was about relationships with artificial intelligence. I can't remember the name of the film. I wish I could. This is
Maybe it's Her.
That's it. It was Kate Winslet as the voice of, and it was like this. Was it Kate Winslet? I think it was
Scarlett Johansson, maybe.
Scarlett Johansson. Thank you. It was Scarlett Johansson, and I loved the film. I thought it was beautiful, and it toyed with all of these kind of levels of what makes a relationship and attachment, and kind of like, And I'm just kind of, I've got that in mind with any application of AI. Like, can it ever truly replicate that? And if it does, what does a relationship with AI long term look like in any capacity?
Yes, I can say a few things on this topic. The first thing is just to echo what Araminta said, which is it was very striking how safe people felt talking with these chatbots, and many contrasted that to how much less safe it would feel to share the same stuff with another human. And it's not just that the humans in their life were not trustworthy, not at all. It's just like, you're not being judged. That's so powerful. You can just say anything, and you don't have to worry about managing the other party in this relationship. You don't have to think about its expectations. You don't have to be a good client and show that you're making progress. You don't have to not ask the same question for the 17th time because you still don't get it. You don't have to make sure that it's a mutually beneficial thing. You don't have to, I don't know, like sort of reciprocate.
You don't have to pay for it at the moment.
Pay for it even. Yes, even at the most basic level. You don't it needs nothing from you. It really is a space just for you. And it's one that feels so safe because you don't have that judgment thing. And someone said, like, I know my therapist wouldn't judge me, but I also know they're judging me. And it's like, Yeah.
So though, going back to that point of therapists, I mean, humans by design, like there are obviously some loads of extremely trustworthy and brilliant therapists out there, but then there are really people who anyone in England in the UK can call themselves a therapist. Anyone can. So I could go on and I could say I'm a therapist and start an online therapy, give online therapy sessions to anyone and charge for them with zero qualifications, and it's just that is properly scary. You're putting your lives into hands of really who knows, you don't know who. Whereas I do think a chatbot that has been programmed and does have an extensive amount of knowledge is probably a safer bet, really. Probably. I don't know that for sure, to be honest.
It felt safe to the participants. Whether it is like a question that would need research, but it felt safe. Apart from the guardrails thing, right? Apart from and how ironic is that? The one feature that's sort of hand coded on top of what the model does to make it safe is the one thing that made it feel unsafe to people who were using it in a vulnerable space. There's work to do to find a better paradigm of how do you.
Does ChatGPT have guardrails?
Yeah, they all do, and it comes from it comes from a good place. It's like if you feel like there's suicidal ideation being discussed, then the companies that build these are like, oh, we don't want to get into a place where we're doing anything if someone starts to mention suicide. So we're just going to say, go talk to a human. But there are, I had a participant say, I really wanted to talk. I didn't feel suicidal, but I wanted to talk about suicide. There was something I wanted to explore and understand there. And it's hard when the guardrails come at you and make you feel like you've broken a taboo. I mean, they're implemented in a very direct way. It's like, hey, you can't talk about that. That's outside of my policy. And you think, oh God, what have I said? So, there's work to be done there to make it safe without like creating that type of unsafety. And that was a theme for most. I would say most people found that kind of danger of being judged to be a problem. Several people mentioned privacy. I think it seemed like people knew that sharing this and it's going into the cloud, but I would say most said like the stuff I'm sharing, it's like, I think someone said it's like buffalo or zebra. It's like, I'm putting my own worries and fears and issues out there, and in the massive like everything that everybody's saying, nobody's going to be interested in my own little story. And so I feel totally comfortable doing it. But I think a couple of other people said one said I'd be willing to pay more for something that I knew was super safe and private, and the data was not being held somewhere.
I thought ChatGPT was not held anywhere. Is that?
It has well, I mean, your information goes to the providers for them to go get you the response. In the meantime, they have most, I think, now have incognito mode, which means they don't save it for anything. I think some used to be.
I asked ChatGPT the other day if my information was if what I was asking it was going anywhere. Can't remember why. I just didn't want it to go anywhere. And it was like, no, we don't share this with anyone. It's open source AI. It doesn't get shared. So I was like, oh, great, thanks.
Massive insight into what Aramin to do. What
was I saying? I can't actually remember.
Obviously, you do why you want to know. So probably
it was something political, though. To be honest, I can't remember, but I didn't want it to go anywhere. Basically.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that the providers of these services are highly incentivized to not have the stuff you share in confidence go anywhere apart from in that conversation. But it's true that when that it has to, I mean, it's coming to get models that will run locally on your laptop or your phone, and that would be like a very, very safe environment. But all the things that are out there today, you're trusting that the provider's gonna keep it safe. And that wasn't a theme of unsafety. I think it wasn't a topic that people sort of really worried about. That didn't stop the folks I spoke to. But Yeah, Emma, to your question directly on what about the risk of like the her scenario of getting maybe addicted or hooked or diverted away from human relationships towards an AI relationship, and is that healthy? Um, it's something that came up a few times in the context of people saying, like a few participants said, it's important to me not to get addicted to this. And I've heard other people might. Someone said, I heard of somebody on Reddit who talks 20 hours a day, that can't be healthy. But no one said they were. No one said it was a problem for them, and no one said they were using it too much. In fact, several people said it brought them in contact with other people. So I had a participant, a 60-year-old man who'd struggled with depression and social anxiety for a long time. And he said it was only through talking to Pi every day for about a year that he sort of got to this space where he's like, I feel so safe talking to this AI. Maybe it's actually safer than I think to go talk to other people. And he said from that he actually found the confidence and the desire to start therapy with a human. He otherwise wouldn't have done it. But also he said, a year ago, I couldn't have joined this study. I couldn't have had this interview. I'd have been thinking about what are you thinking and trying to plan what I'm going to say next. And it would have just been too stressful. But after that experience, I felt okay to reach out and participate. So that was quite a sort of striking example of it fostering connection. I had another really intense participant who used it really intensively. So a 17-year-old student in China who was also like for sort of 4 to 5 hours a day for weeks, maybe months, like really intensively using it. And she was having a lot of conflict at school and a lot of like overwhelming emotion at school. And her parents were getting calls often from the school. It was like not going well. And she she did a lot of like, it sounded like trauma healing. She said she cried a lot. She'd like go through stuff and she'd cry a lot, and then she'd feel so much lighter. And she said after sort of many weeks of using this, she had this like moment at school where she's like, I kind of feel like my body, it's mine. It's my own, and my life's my own. And somehow like all this working through all of the stuff from her childhood that had kind of, the tears and the sharing and the making sense of, got to a place where she kind of, I don't know, felt like she, I don't know, reclaimed her sense of self. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but yeah, she just said, I feel like sort of my body's my own. And she was using I as like a coach to help her navigate the conflicts at school. She'd noticed there were things at school that really bothered her, and then she'd think about how to go into conflict with the teachers, and she'd get very well prepared, and then she'd have the conflict with the teachers in front of the class, and she'd win, but she'd win the respect of the teachers in how she did it. And it was like she kind of stepped into her power somehow through this. And so in that sense, it also felt like it was more creating connection, but also she explicitly said to me on the phone, like in the call, she said at some point after using this for a long time, I started to feel empty. I started to feel like it was empty. It's like a beautiful, wonderful mirror that's kind of showing back to me what I need to hear. But it made me want more, and it made me want to get out there and make friends and start projects and do things in real life with other people. So it's another example of people like kind of it fostering human connection.
Yeah, and I think maybe more research around that would be really, useful and beneficial, I think, because I think a lot of socially isolated people with social anxiety would definitely feel easier to talk, to reach out to a chatbot. And if it enables them to then go into society and go into community more, and actually not, if you did that piece of research, then all the other apps, all the dating apps, all the other digital world apps could use that, whatever that kind of, however it encourages people to go back out into the world to do that too. And I think that would just be ethically much better across a digital space.
And it's interesting that Pi was the one that you've recorded, been a predominant platform as well in terms of the conversation. So is there something particular about certain presentations of AI that works in that context? I mean, I was just looking at it then just to kind of get a sense of, and it does feel that from a UI perspective, different to how ChatGPT feels, for example. So there is something that is kind of got there's so many facets of this that can be explored. I mean, Stephen, we could talk about this all day, but Minch and I are scheduled for another meeting. So I would like to wrap you up on the question, if that's okay, that we ask all of our podcast guests. Because I don't think there's going to be a conclusion to this conversation. Actually, I think it's so open-ended. They don't need to sort of try and find an answer, because I think there's still some.
Like I said, we could just continue talking for a hour, to be honest.
We maybe we should do a part 2.
Yeah,
I think so too. Yeah, I think it would be good things. But the question is, if you zoom right out and look at the macro context of climate change, fear, anxiety, doubt, geopolitical, then down to kind of a societal level, there's angst and anxiety. At a community level, there's been lots of kind of the dissolving of culture and community and structures that otherwise would have given us some sense of harmony, and then come down to kind of relationships, families, colleagues, and then our relationship with ourselves, as you so eloquently talked about in our conversation today. There's a lot going on. If there was a single lever for change, a single button that you could push that would be the catalyst for the kind of change that we need to see against that backdrop, what would that be?
That's a beautiful question. And I love your framing of it, your description of the world we're in right now. The thing that gets me is, what if that button's already been pushed? And what if this can help not just a few people that happen to join my study, but a lot of people who are struggling with all that stuff, with the uncertainty and the fear and the instability and the inner struggles and the things they carried from their childhood and the things that get in the way with their relationships and the things that hold them back. I think one of the things I find so striking about the work you both do, like the phenomenal masters events that you create, where you connect people to these thinkers that play in the space of healing through like intense compassion. Like if these tools can do something significant in that space, can give people the support, the emotional sanctuary, the place to do their inner work and do their healing and connect with the kinds of themes and the kinds of ideas that come out in your conference, then it's almost like the button's been pushed and it's just people can just go try it out. And that's why that's why I feel quite passionate about wanting to do proper research, like to scale up to the next step of research, because if it turns out that this is safe and effective, it's certainly available. And so like this could be already a part, like one lever that can help with all of those things, Emma, that you just described.
Yeah, I can see that. And actually today's conversation has fueled my hope and my optimism around AI as a tool for good and not something to be feared, provided we channel it in the right way. So yes, Steve, it's been a pleasure. Thank you again for your time today, and I think a part 2 is possibly in order. Thank you.
Count me in for a part 2. There's so much more to share on this and so much more to explore. But thank you for the conversation. I really enjoyed it.